Welcome. Everybody hear me? Okay, great. My name's Emily Mello. I'm Associate Director of Education here at the New Museum, and I want to welcome you tonight for Karen Rose's gallery talk, Learning How to Heal Yourself with Plants. We are here for this talk because of this wonderful exhibition in residency by artist Simone Leigh, The Waiting Room, which was co-curated by myself, as well as Sean Leonardo and Johanna Burton here at the New Museum. We've had an incredible, can't believe it's only been a month because so much has happened, including a wonderful series of public care sessions led by several of Simone's collaborators, longtime collaborators and friends, and including Learning How to Heal Yourself with Plants, a Saturday series of workshops that's much more intimate and in-depth. But we have this wonderful opportunity to hear more about her overall approach to thinking about herbalism this evening. Karen also, as part of the exhibition, has been working with some of our underground programs, our teen programs, including Home Economics, a series of courses designed by or conceptualized by Simone with her collaborators, where a group of young women are working regularly with Karen each week, as well as Amy Meredith Cox with Afro Centering, as well as Kiara Watanabe with taiko drumming. Herbalists who are apprentices and collaborators with her have also been working with our Teen Apprentice program. Some of the teen apprentices are here in their aprons and might have assisted you in getting seated tonight, as well as I think I hit all of the, did I hit everything? She's been an incredible part of the exhibition, Karen, working with several audiences. And I just want to read a very brief bio, but you'll learn more about her work after a short video. Born in Guyana and growing up in Ditmas Park, Karen Rose has always had an interest in herbs and their power to heal. Founding Sacred Vibes Healing and Sacred Vibes Apothecary in Brooklyn 2002, Karen is trained in Eastern and Western herbal medicine and is personally dedicated to empowering individuals to make informed decisions regarding their health and lives. She draws from over 15 years of experience as a community, clinical, and formulary master herbalist. And for the New Museum, she's been focusing on how women may live inspired lives using the energies of plants. Please join me in welcoming Karen Rose.
We know healing about community because community is integral to how we heal. I'm doing creative about the purpose of years now. And I would say my purpose is to make sure that many people have this education because that's a huge part of this medicine. And I think my larger part is to create a healing in each home. I'm thinking about supporting smaller, communal framework, like we used to have when we were the time guys, where folks knew your story. I was someone who would have now like a strain in the digestive system. It was a little girl and I like intriguing. And there was this healer, and her hands were shaped in the form of her work. And she would rub my belly, but she would use lemongrass oil. I just remember the scent, the ocean breeze, and her hands on my body. It was my association with what healing can feel like. I think I've always taken that with me. I think the legacy that Sickle leaves is one of how to connect to your ancestors, how to use the medicine that's in front of us to make our bodies whole, and how to pass this information on to people that look like us and are really open to that new perspective.
Thank you for coming out and being present. Thank you, Simone. I know Simone is somewhere around, but thank you, Simone, for creating this opportunity that I can come and share my work and talk to you a bit more about Sacred Vibes healing, but also about my history and just being Karen Rose in this work. Um, so some of the time I'm going to spend talking about my ancestors, and I thought, well, I wanted to honor the folks that are here that are currently a big part of this work that I do. And so Lauren, who's my daughter, is over here in yellow, and she's pretty amazing because it was Lauren who brought me to this work to begin with, or helped me remember this work. So I grew up in Guyana, like the video states, and coming here at 14 years old, I forgot a lot of this work, or we abandoned a lot of what it means to be a healer, what it means to heal with plant medicine. And then after having Lauren, returning to this work as a way of wanting to be able to take care of her and empower myself to make those decisions about what care is best for her, that led me to study what we call Western herbalism, or the plants that live or exist where we are in the West. As things would go wrong with Lauren, I would call my grandmother, who was still in Guyana, and I would ask her about some of the plants that she would use, or what would you use for this? And she would recommend plants that grew in the Amazon. So at that point, I knew that I had to study the plants that existed here, because I lived in Arizona, which was a desert. So we had very different ecologies, and trying to find the plants that my grandmother recommended just wasn't working out well for me. So that's when I formally went back to school and started to study herbalism. I exist in a space in New York, in Brooklyn, called Sacred Vibes Apothecary, which is pretty magical. You saw some pictures of it. We've been there for 8 years in that space, and it certainly is a temple to me. I think the biggest thing that that space gives me every day is a connection that's so much deeper than I could even imagine, and a lot of conversations that I see myself in. So I'm often mirrored each day being in that space. So I'm consistently reinforced that this is the path that I'm on, and that it's the one that's for me in that space. So much of this medicine comes through me through ancestry. My grandfather was what we would call a root worker. He was also many things. He was a rice farmer, he was a balata bleeder, and he was an herbalist, or a roots man. So within his community, he was specifically known for healing rattlesnake bites, which, of course, growing up in the Amazon, there are many snakes, and if you worked in a sugarcane field or a rice field, then you were consistently getting bitten by snakes. And so my grandfather knew what medicine there was for treating each snake bite and how to make that happen. That I did not find out until I was much older. What I did know is that anything that affected us, we turned to medicine. This history is still really strong on my mother's side also, because my grandmother was very instrumental in bringing us up. And so we lived in a coast of Guyana called Essequibo. It was colonized by the Dutch, and so we took the name Essequibo as the place in which we live. It's this coast that follows along the water, and you're pretty much isolated from any other community, which makes so much of what my work the work that I do right now, is very reflected in that. So living in Essequibo, where my grandmother was, we did not have access to doctors. Our medicine was purely the medicine of what people brought with them to that specific coast. It was a coast where we had lots of indentured servants who were Chinese, which is part of my heritage. We also have Indians from India, and we also had slaves from Ghana, specifically, was my heritage. And so everyone brought their medicine with them, and so if we got sick, that meant that we would go to members in the community who were healers. We did not call them healers. So today it's often a phenomenon to hear people refer to me as a healer, or hear me call other folks healers. We did not call ourselves anything. We referred to ourselves as Uncle Habib or Auntie Sundar. Go to them and they will take care of whatever was happening in your body. And we knew, so we knew that if we felt ill, either it was something that was happening physically in our body, but we also knew to recognize if something spiritually was occurring with us, because then we would go to the healer that would take care of us spiritually. So healing the physical and the spiritual dimension has always been connected for me. And this is the way I continue to practice. There's no separation between the emotional well-being, the spiritual well-being, and our physical well-being. They're all deeply connected. And I feel very fortunate to have been raised in that legacy. So I honor my ancestors each day for the teachings that they brought forward in me today to be able to stand in my power. There's an interdependence between plants and communities, and that's one of the things that I will talk about today, is why the framework of community healing is so important. I do everything through stories. I like to tell stories. My dad tells lots of stories, and I believe that's what I've inherited. And so every time I go home to my father's land, my father lives on the opposite side of my mom's, where my mom lived, and my father's people were farmers. And so they are what I call soil people or mud people. Every time I go home, there's so much soil, there's so much farmland, it's very rich in that way. And so the last time I went home, it's interesting to me how everyone is so deeply connected to their heritage. I would say who I was, and they would read my heritage back to me like it was a story. They would tell me the name of my ancestors. They would name the name of my father's brothers and sisters. He had 9 of them, and they would repeat the names in their stories. And I thought, well, of course, this is part of who I am also as a healer. So much legacy that's connected to the land itself, and they would talk about the land. They would take me to my father's coconut tree, and I would say, whose coconut tree is this? And they would say, it's Frederick's, it's your father's coconut tree. And I'd say, it's still here? And they say, yeah, we know exactly where it is. And I'm completely blown away, because that's beyond my lifetime when that tree was planted. And they still are aware of exactly the spot where that is. So this healing or this legacy that I'm talking about is also deeply connected to the soil, and it's no surprise then that I chose to work with it, because my ancestors have done so for many decades. We will talk about what healing plants offers today, and I'm going to talk about it in a lot of emotional and spiritual ways. About the healing that plants offers. But before that, I wanted to talk about our connection to our ancestors. So my brilliant daughter, who's studying medicine, I always find that really funny because she was never raised on medicine. So I'm like, okay, sure, you want to be an herbalist? She's like, no, actually, I want to be a doctor. Okay. I'm like, great. So we have these really brilliant conversations around science. And some of the things that we talk about is our DNA. And in my study of botany, I got to understand that so much of our DNA is connected to the DNA of plants. Some people say 99%, it wavers in that percentage, but our DNA is so similar that the medicine activates or works in such a way that sometimes we don't even expect it to work, but it knows us so well because it's its own DNA. Lauren and I talk about the DNA of our ancestors. And so we sat around one day talking about how our ancestors' DNA were programmed that we can also manage or cope with the things that they've already experienced. What that means as a Black woman is that my ancestors left me memory in my DNA regarding their traumas that they experienced so that I would find a way to easier cope with that trauma. That's pretty incredible when we think about our connection, therefore, to ancestral healing. I remember talking about this back in the early 90s when I first started this practice, and I was saying, so many women are coming in to see me, and they're feeling as if there was an occurrence in their life, but they knew for sure that there was an occurrence in their life, but they could not shake the memory of what was going on with them. And so in some ways, I started to think of what does ancestral trauma means and how does it affect us now, presently. I couldn't scientifically prove it until epigenetics started to say that we were deeply connected to our DNA that we carry, and the memories of our grandmothers is deeply embedded into our bodies. And so if my ancestors left me messages, how do I remember them? How do I begin to learn the stories that they have left that's encoded into my DNA? And I believe plant medicine is the link in our memory that connects us to that, the messages that our ancestors left for us. So, if I'm a direct product of my ancestors' trauma, then any children that I have will also feel the effect of my ancestors' trauma. And so a huge part of my work has been to care for myself first. I stopped to think of, I have a daughter, so if I'm connected to the trauma that my grandmother had, how do I pass this on? How have I passed this on to my daughter? And what work needs to be done within myself to make sure that this doesn't occur again, that we don't carry these burdens. 2 years ago, about 4 years ago, I wanted to go back a little bit. 4 years ago, my mom had to have open heart surgery. And so at that point, I started to say, why is it that all the women in our family, especially in my maternal lines on my mother's side, has heart issues? And I started to question my mom. I started to ask my grandmother stories about what was going on with our hearts. Well, my grandmother, Emma, who was a Chinese immigrant and moved to Guyana when she was 18, was married, well, she wasn't married. She had children with an immigrant from Ghana. His name was Jonathan Bascom. My Chinese family were not happy. So every time Emma had a baby, and this happened 3 times, they would send her to Barbados to give her baby up and then return to Guyana as if nothing had happened. So over time, Emma's heart broke, as is quite natural and quite imaginable. And I think that the heartache that exists within my family links all the way back to Emma's heartbreak. And so that it was that my mom's sister, and every other woman in the family had heart issues. So then I started to look and say, well, I have Lauren. How do I heal this ancestral trauma? How do I find the spaces that this sadness still lives within my DNA, and it's quite present and shows up in moments that I haven't demonstrated, that I continue to demonstrate in my life, but I'm not tied to it, that I'm not tied to that remembrance. It is through plants that this healing has occurred. So I started to take plant medicine. I started to remember as many stories as I could. I started to connect. I started to speak. I started to talk to my mom about the heartbreak, which was silent, which not many people would speak about. And we have to speak on it if we are to heal it. And so I'd have those open discussions now with my children in hopes that whatever traumatic experiences that we've experienced, if we bring them to light, if we're held in the safety of using plant medicine, that we're able to express and we're able to talk about these traumas. So my work now is really an alchemical process. It's taking a look at all the generational trauma that we may hold and how do we move that through our bodies into a way that feels healed and makes you a whole person. And sometimes the ancestral trauma is not only a generation away, but several generations away. So I talk to immigrants who feel ancestral trauma from leaving home. I talk to people who have had slavery in their past. And so what is the ancestral trauma? What is the legacy that's being stored within their bodies? And how can we change that to create a whole human being? So what is the healing that plant medicine really offers in this regard? Plants activate the memory, as I spoke about, in our DNA. The medicine goes hand in hand with our self-care. Our human bodies have energetic centers throughout them. Throughout our human bodies are energetic centers. These are centers that hold light. And when we are not feeling well, our human body cannot hold light or does not emit light. So not only are we affecting our entire body, but in fact, we're affecting the entire earth in its balance. So the more whole we feel, then the more connected we are to our universe. And plants really turn our attention inward. I give many people plant medicine, and the first thing they say is, I don't know what happened. And I'll say, well, what happened? And they'll say, I got really quiet, or I got really angry, or I started to dream, I started remembering things happened. And I said, yes, that can happen in plant medicine. Well, why didn't you tell me before I took it, they would say. And I'd say, well, I really don't know how it affects each person. I'm still trying to figure that out. And I don't think it's something that I need to figure out. Plants are really magical in the way they work in our bodies. They open up spaces where that has been closed. They close spaces that have been too open. They help you to tell the truth when it's hard for you. They remove fear, they give you courage. They teach you patience, they teach you how to trust, they teach you how to open your heart. All these things I know because they've worked for me. So when I give someone plant medicine, I am not sure of what the healing that they're trying to access. But I know for sure that it will work and that they will come back to me with stories. And sometimes they're not so happy to come back to me because they will say, I can't believe I've been taking this plant. I've been angry all week. And I'm like, yes, I know. And so many plants, access places that we would rather not have accessed. So, for example, if you're taking a bitter herb, oftentimes a bitter herb works on your liver. And so it's indigenous practices believe that the liver is what holds anger. So when you're taking something that's healing and releasing what's held in your liver, of course it's going to heal and release your anger. And so people say, well, I don't know if I should take this anymore. And I'd say, absolutely, that's the plan for you. Take more of it. And so they'll say, well, I have to stay away from my partner. I have to stay away from my work. And sometimes that's exactly what you needed. So plant medicine really turns us inward. Most of our life is spent in such an external place. I ask people consistently, how do you feel? And they stop. And it's like they hadn't thought about it the entire day. And I'll say, when did you start feeling sick? And they'll say, what do you mean? And I'll say, when was the last time you felt well? And they said, what do you mean? I've never felt well. And it's really hard then to work with someone who's never felt well. To achieve wellness, we have to have a baseline. So we're extended so much outside of ourselves that we cannot even see sometimes inside of ourselves what it means to be well, what it means to feel good, what it means to feel joy, what it means to feel happiness. And sometimes that's exactly what plant medicine does. It's like, hello, let me introduce you to wholeness. Let me introduce you to what it means to be joyful. And so once you know these things, then it's so much easier for us to work, isn't it? Because then we can tell the times that you're out of balance or out of harmony or how you're feeling on any given day, if it's different from anything that you've experienced. My favorite is oftentimes, well, when did you start feeling sick? And folks will say, I really don't know. I was so busy. I can't tell you. It's been like days ago. And I start to talk about what it means to be empowered. What it means to go to your doctor and say to your doctor, I have been sick for 3 days, and this is how I've been sick. Here's what doesn't feel right. This is what feels wrong with me today. This is the part of my body that hurts. So often, many people come into the apothecary, and I'll say, what herbs? And they say, my stomach. And I'll say, where's your stomach? And it'll be like all over. It's like everything down from the neck. It's the stomach. And so I say, okay, let's relearn your body. Let's know where your liver is. Let's know where your pancreas is. Let's know where your intestines is. Let's know where your womb is. Because this is so important in becoming empowered in our own self-care. Instead of going to our doctors and saying, can you tell me what's wrong with me? How different would it be if we went and we said, this is what's wrong with me, this is what I believe what's wrong with me, and therefore these are the things that I want you to check out. And so much a part of this healing is that. That is the work, that's so much a part of my work. To be able, I pass this education on to my children also because I want them to also be as descriptive of what's going on in their bodies as possible from as young as possible. Accessing plant medicine. I feel like plant medicine is everywhere. So after I teach an apprenticeship program out of my apothecary where I spend about 3 years with each individual teaching them botany, plant identification, medicine making, how to use medicine with yourself, how to use medicine within your community, and extending that outward. And after the first class, folks are often amazed at how much plant medicine actually exists in our world that we don't pay attention to. So we live in New York City, and I often think of, when I started practicing herbalism, I practiced in the Southwest. And it was a desert, but there was so much plant medicine also there. And when I came to New York, a lot of the herbalists that I had worked with just couldn't imagine where was plant medicine. Like, where would you find it in the city? And so coming to the city, I had to rediscover where plant medicine exists. So urban herbalism has a very different approach and a very different view. A lot of our plant medicine exists in city parks. There's a ton. I live near Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and I say, whoever planted this park had to be an herbalist. There's so much medicine. And that's very true about all the parks that we are around. So plant medicine is even on our sidewalk. So on my walk to the train, I identify at least 10 plants each day. You'll see dandelion, you'll see mugwort, you'll see plantain, you'll see burdock, sometimes you'll see yellow dock, you'll see motherwort. It's just all over. A lot of the plants we use are weeds. So we can access plant medicine because plant medicine grows around us. And I'm a believer that plants grow where we need them. And the plants that grow in our hemisphere are the plants that we should be using for healing ourselves. So many times people will say to me, Karen, how about this root that's found in the Amazon? What do you think about that? And I'll say, do you live in the Amazon? And they'll say, no. And I'll say, well, then you don't need it. And because our bodies are acclimated to where we are. So folks that live in the Amazon need Amazonian herbs. We live in New York City. We need the herbs that live with us. So the ones that poke through the sidewalks, the ones that we see on our walk to the train, even though you shouldn't pick it and use that, try to find cleaner places. But those generally are the herbs that are showing up here for us. And so it seems like in New York City that we need lots of liver cleaning and lots of sleep because those are the herbs that are generally most prolific in our parks and also our sidewalks. So if we took the time to stop and listen or stop and look at a plant, we can learn a ton about a plant. Plants talk to us, they tell us who they are, and they tell us how they should be used. So for example, we look at a plant and it looks like a body part. We look at a plant and it has bright red flowers like your blood, or bright red berries like your blood. You look at a plant and it has yellow flowers. All of these are signatures to what that plant is and how it heals us. So consistently, if we pay attention, which is really difficult here in the city, but if we try to pay attention, the plants want to tell us about their use and how we should use them. Could we use them for joy? Those bright yellow flowers certainly can be, right? They look like the sun. They look like warmth. They look like cheer. That's a good plant for joy. Then what about the plants that have red berries and red flowers and look like blood? Heart? Yeah. Circulation? Absolutely. Then there are flowers, there are leaves that look like body parts. There are leaves, the mullein leaf looks like a lung. That's probably what you should be using it for. So even if we had no books and we just took the time to sit with a plant, there's so much communication that's currently happening. And as you gain confidence in this communication, then you too can start to use plants that as you sit and you listen and you observe, that they also can help you heal in certain ways. People will say to me, Karen, my entire backyard just took over with this weed. And I'll say, what's going on in your body? And they'll say, what do you mean? And I say, well, it grew on your property. It came to you, so use it. And I don't think that anyone has ever come back to and told me that it wasn't the plant that they need in my 15 years of work. So I'd have to say that it's exactly the plant that you need that's growing near you. It's quite magical. So plants, and as an herbalist, I'm a steward of a plant. There's such a thing as ethical plants, harvesting of plants, and there's such a thing as unethical harvesting of plants. And so oftentimes what we find is that the more exotic that we get with plants, the more unethical our harvesting practices become. And so we think that we would need ginseng for just about everything because everyone's talking about it. And I'll say, no, you actually don't need ginseng. There's lots of other stuff that you can use that exists around you that we do not capitalize on the ginseng industry that is packed with poachers of ginseng. So also our use of plant medicine has to be tied to our integrity of this practice. So, forgo looking for the most exotic plant material and get to know the weeds that exist around you and use that for your healing. Yes, sometimes we need ginseng, but we want to have ginseng for the rest of for my daughter's generation and her children's generation to also be able to use this plant material. So there is plants that are endangered, and that we should also be aware of what plants are endangered and not use those plants as much in our medicine. I want you to know that I'm going to open up to a Q&A in a little bit, so even though I'm speaking a lot, we could tie this back around in a bit. I talked about the necessity for community in the framework of healing. I tell this through a story of my brother who had, my brother's name is Brian, he's no longer with us, he had sickle cell anemia. And sickle cell anemia is a blood disease, and he had it from birth, and when Brian was about 6 months old, my mother discovered that he had sickle cell anemia. And so growing up in Guyana, in Essequibo, on that coast, what that looked like for me is that every time I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was someone in my house who I didn't recognize, it was because my brother, or I did recognize, was because my brother was having a crisis. So what that looked like was the women who lived down the street from us would be in our home several nights a month rocking my brother. My mom was a teacher and my dad was a policeman, and so they had to be at work early in the morning. So our breakfast would be made by someone who lived down the street. We called her Auntie such and such or Uncle such and such. And they would be there. They would make sure that we got to school. They would make sure that we came home. They would make sure that my mom slept, and they would make sure that my brother was cared for as best as possible every time he has a sickle cell crisis. A crisis lasts for about a week, anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks, and it's a very painful situation because what happens is your cells, your blood cells, are shaped like sickle or like a banana moon, and they try to pass through your veins, which round blood cells pass through your veins. Sickle blood cells don't, and they stay there, and they have pain until they actually break apart. So the life of the blood cell is how long you're in crisis. And so these women would be in my home many days throughout the month, and they would cook for us, and they would make sure that we were taken care of. Fast forward to when I was 14, and therefore my brother was about 18, and so we immigrated here to Brooklyn. And my brother had his first crisis, and he had it actually right after getting off the plane, because when you fly and you have sickle cell anemia, then you're denied oxygen, so therefore your blood vessels constrict, right? So when we arrived here in New York and my brother had his first crisis, my mom was working 2 jobs as an immigrant, so was my father. He was working 2 jobs, and we were going to school, and my brother was home sick. What was noticeably different was that there was no one in my home holding my brother. There was no one cooking for us. There was no one sending us off to school. As a matter of fact, we had shifts about who would be at the hospital. I was 14, and my shift was after I got off from school. So I would do my homework next to my brother's bed, and then I would shift off to my sister, who would come in after me. And then after she left, my mom would come in. And this is after my mom had already worked 2 jobs. So therefore, my mom's health declined. When there's no community, healing, or what it means to be whole, is so much more difficult to access and to maintain. When community is available, you're able to stay in a place of wellness or maintain a place of wellness as best as you can. So much of my work now, so much of my work with my apprentices, so much of my work in my practice is to talk about what community healing means for us and what healing truly means when you function as part of the community. When we get sick in the West, folks said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have cancer. You have diabetes. You have whatever you have because it's you. You kind of have that on your own." I never understand that language, and I struggle with it even now to hear that. As if we had no part in what's occurring as a community. Trauma is increased upon a family who does not have community assistance from their community. No one is sick on their own. Our sickness is absolutely deeply connected to our resources and how we are, Black women in general. If we don't have community, if we don't have access to medicine as other folks, of course we're ill. Of course our illness is different, and of course the way we heal is completely different. And taking this into consideration is a huge part of my practice. Indigenous always believe that when someone is ill, it's a representation of what's going on in the community. So we hear these awful news stories, and I've been in conversation with Lauren about moms who turn around and kill their children. And then we turn around and we accuse the mom and say, "How could this possibly happen? What was wrong with you?" PTSD is a real thing. Postpartum depression is a real thing. And if we don't have access to places or resources, places of healing, community around us that can see that we're falling apart, then this will only keep repeated. But we have this way about us that we look to that person to be like, "You're responsible for yourself, and therefore you're responsible to heal yourself." When their illnesses is just a demonstration of our complete lack of balance that exists within us, around us, on this earth in general. So there's no healing without community for me. Health is not maintained in a vacuum. It cannot be. I don't see how it could be. And after these years of practice, I for sure can say I haven't seen it been done in a vacuum before. I haven't seen anyone go into their homes, close their doors, and come out healed. So obviously, we need to think about one of the practices that I ask my students to do is to write 8 members, 8 people that you can turn to that's part of your community. It's often challenging, and sometimes it's really emotional, because that's when we realize how much we've isolated ourselves. And so not only do we write the names of the folks that we could reach out to, but I also ask them to contact those people and tell them that you will be reaching out to them for their help. Asking for help is really hard. But you see, when you live in a community, folks already begin to see that you need help, and they reach out to you also. Living in isolation, we cannot get that. And plants grow in community. Anytime you look at a plant, you will see other plants around it. If a plant is thriving, the other plants around it is also thriving. As a matter of fact, if your garden is not doing really well, there are certain plants you can plant next to those plants, and those plants will help heal what's going on with the other plants. And so I've learned a lot about community by just watching the plants. and how they talk to each other with a root system that we have yet to understand in science, how they send messages back and forth to each other. They talk about temperature, they talk about water, they talk about sun, they talk about what's going on in the environment all day back and forth. So yes, the message of community is something that I definitely needed to share with you tonight. What's so important about this work is reimagining what healing can look like. It's radical to think that we can reimagine what healing can look like and that we don't have to be contented with the healing that exists around us, that we can say, you know what, I really think that healing for me can look really different. Number one, healing can look like I'm empowered. I can know what's going on in my body. Number two, we can say, who in my community can I connect to that are healers that I can be in touch with, that I can say that this doesn't quite feel right, what do you think? That we can trust those responses back from. And then number three is extending that to our larger community and being able to say, I can show up with you in times of trauma, and here's the medicine that I can prepare for you by creating a way that we can create medicines for ourselves. It seems so difficult to create medicines for yourself, but the first time you do, you will say, I can't believe that was it. It is so easy to create medicine for yourself, to take plants as medicine for yourself. So who are the medicine holders in your family? Who are the people that you access medicine? Who do you call when you need medicine? Throughout this work, I've heard so many great stories about grandmothers. I've heard, I call my grandmother when something's wrong with me. I've heard, I call my aunt when something's wrong with me. I call just my great aunt, anyone who has this medicine. Recognizing who's the medicine holder in your family is really important. Sometimes it's you. And sometimes you're here because you're that medicine holder. And that's really a legacy that we want to hold on to and we want to share. We want to name our medicine holders. We want to let them know how much we appreciate them, and we want to learn as much as possible from them. Many times, that person has passed on, and they've passed on with the information. For immigrants, oftentimes we've left that medicine behind from where we've come. And so I say, sometimes you don't need that person to be alive, you just need to be inspired. And then you become the medicine holder for your family. And you pass your recipes on. And you tell your children what plants to pick, what is the best time to pick it, what is the best medicine to make with it, and how you should administer that medicine. And each family needs a medicine holder. That's radical in thinking. Every family should have a healer within the family. And you should pass this on to each generation that comes. My children, I try to educate them about my work. I have them in the apothecary with me. I teach them what plants are for what. I don't know who would be the one that actually holds that medicine, but I'm open to any of them, and I'm open to all of them holding that medicine. And so each time that we see that we're not feeling well, I think it's so empowering to say, what can I do first for myself that would help me to feel better? And then you start to journal, and you start to write, and you start to keep a record of what you've done and what has helped you feel better. And you ask questions, and you come into my apothecary or any other apothecary, and you ask questions, and you try the medicine, and you see how it makes you feel, and then you take note of that. And that's how you become a medicine holder, even if you're not connected to one, or you've left yours behind, or they're not present with you here. What does it mean to be well? Well, you have to determine what it means to be well, but I can tell you for sure that it's different for everyone, and it's certainly connected to our culture. So what it means to be well for you and what it means to be well for me may be totally different things because of my ancestry, my generation, and other things that are occurring in my environment. And so therefore, when we go to doctors, and we're always assigned one medicine, so if 5 of us go and 5 of us have diabetes, we're given the same diabetic drug, but yet there's so many different things that's occurring in my body that's very different from what's occurring in yours. And so we have to be in a position that we're able to say, hey, this is what's going on in my body that makes me very different from the other people that you've worked with. And this is how it's affecting me in a personal way. So awareness is huge. And it's part of the radical thinking of what it means to change the way health looks like in our community, number one, but in our larger community, what does health look like and what it means. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, there were so many little botanicas that existed. I talked about that, and little community healers that had spaces within that community. And when I came back to New York, after living in Arizona, I returned to New York in early 2000, and I said, where is everything? And it's a direct reflection of what's happening in our community. There's no access anymore. So we have to create spaces in our new framework and thinking about what it means to be healthy and what it means to have healthcare look different for us. It's more spaces like mine. It's more botanicas, it's more healers that sometimes we look at the door and we're like, should we go in there or not? I'm not really sure what's happening in there, but I'm like being called to come in. Even in my apothecary, which I don't think is such a scary place, people will come in and say, what's going on in here? Do you have a wand? But yeah, the plants. But, I feel like we're returning to the space where we're demanding more spiritual healers. Spiritual healers are on the front line of this work. They are on the front line of our liberation work. And so I remember going into botanicas and being like, I kind of feel like something is off. And right away, people would be like, well, let me prepare you something to help you with that. And so we were always functioning somehow outside of the standard medical model when there were things that were going on with us that we knew that we could access help with, right? And sometimes we just needed a bath with something. Sometimes we just needed to, change our thinking about something. And that's where these places provide. And they really are on the front line of what it means to be whole and healthy. If we truly believe that our healing is connected to what's going on with us emotionally, then those places need to exist. So in my community in Brooklyn, my work is to connect folks to those healers that are not as seen in the community, but exists within the community. And for certain, immigrant communities always have their healers, whether we know them or whether we don't. But they always have someone that they've brought with them that they know is a healer and that they can turn to. And so creating a larger access to these folks has really been an important part of my work in saying, how could we work together so that we provide healing or on many different dimensions, because healing isn't only accessed in the physical dimension, there's many other dimensions. And plants actually work in a dimension that's not physical. So for us to be using plant medicine, we're also going in between dimensions in that way, likewise. I wanted to open it up for questions. Thank you. Yes. I think when I speak of dimensions, I don't speak of a tangible place. I'm talking about my physical body. So I understand that my physical body is a very different place from my spiritual body. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, I would say, where are you? I would ask, where have you identified yourself to be? I know I'm in my physical body in the present, but that isn't always so. There are many times that I'm functioning outside of my physical body, and sometimes I need to call myself back into my physical body because it's the tendency for us to consistently want to leave this body. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. That is a practice that's done oftentimes in Eastern Europe, and I wish I was around it more because it sounds quite magical. So what he was talking about is actually putting the seed inside of your mouth and being encoded by your DNA, and then planting that medicine, so then it's able to talk to you much better. I would love to study that further.
One of the things that's so interesting about what you've been talking about is creating a culture of healing, and the idea that we don't have a culture like that right now. And I guess, can you just talk more? What's your vision for the future, right? Like, how do we all have healers in our? How do we get to a place where we all have healers in our family? What are the steps we take?
Some of what I shared and I wanted to remind you is, number one, being in touch with your body.
Right.
Number two, viewing a medicine, every time I go somewhere and someone say, you're an alternative practitioner, and I say, alternative to what? And so they'll say, well, you're not the part of the American Medical Association, so that's traditional. American Medical Association is it 200 years old yet? And so I consistently remind people that indigenous practices have been around for 5,000 years or more. And so therefore, just the concept that this is alternative, that this is outside of ourselves, that we're disconnected from it, I think just switching that concept and realizing that we're deeply connected already to this medicine, and what we're doing is remembering what our ancestors used and then bringing that forward, I think that's probably the biggest step in first embracing this medicine and having it be a part of your life. Yes.
What do you think about ayahuasca?
There are many plants that are teachers. So ayahuasca is a teacher plant, but dandelion, on my way to the train, is a teacher plant. And so many people come in and they'll say, well, I want to take ayahuasca. And I say, go spend a week with dandelion and come back to me and tell me what you think. So the accessibility to medicine opening up, so ayahuasca opens us up to another whole dimension, right? It's a journeying plant. Any plant you can journey with. Mugwort is a journey. Have you ever taken mugwort? Any of you taken mugwort before? I see Tabitha, I know you have. But anyone else? So mugwort is this plant that grows, it's a weed that goes in New York. And you don't even have to take it. You could cut a piece of the plant, put it next to your pillow, and your dreams are incredible. It's for lucid dreaming. So you wake up the next morning and you remember everything that you dreamt about, but you've been dreaming all night, going in and out of different places. So when folks say, well, I need to go to Peru to take ayahuasca, I said, no, you need to go to Prospect Park. Start there. And then figure it out. Yeah. Yeah, in the back first and then you. I do. I recommend wild foraging for all the weeds that surround us. But like I was saying before, be careful because we live in the city, right? So it's like you don't want to wild forage next to the train or on your way to the train. Like where the dogs go, you don't want to wild forage. So just think of places that have clean herbs and plants, maybe up in the Catskills or a little further, like on a train ride, or in parks that don't spray. So Prospect Park does not spray, Central Park does. And so, access your herbs wisely. Mm-hmm. Yes, right here.
I know many people you mentioned cancer earlier. Do you have any thoughts about what the plants, I guess, world has to say about that?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I would say the plant world doesn't necessarily have anything to say about cancer. What the plant world has to do is with wholeness. It talks about how do I make a body whole. So the big difference between plant medicine and allopathic medicine is that we take allopathic medicine specifically for a symptom or specifically for one disease, and then that medicine is supposed to target that symptom or target that disease. Plant medicine doesn't do that. Plant medicine tries to see what is within this entire being that needs to be made whole. So if cancer is coming from an emotional or spiritual or traumatic experience, then the plant medicine is well, what is it that needs to be made whole? And when I talk about wholeness, many people say, well, what do you mean about wholeness and people die? And I say, well, death is also part of the healing process. And so it's it's a longer conversation. Mhm. Yes. Yes. Mhm.
Sorry. So when you consider how we carry trauma intergenerationally, do you think that it's helpful or hurtful to seek healing from someone out of your community, outside of your community? Specifically, as a Black woman, do I then seek a healer that does not relate or cannot understand the level of trauma that I'm dealing with daily on a daily basis?
Exactly. So I think my practice, I think, yeah, I mean, I think my practice is important because of that. So I practice in Brooklyn. I practice in East Flatbush. There's a reason I practice there. There's a reason that I stay there. And one of the major reasons is that there are not many people who are practicing as clinical herbalists who were women of color or women who looked like the person who was coming in the door. And it's therefore really important to connect to folks who look like you. And so when you start to talk, if you're talking about trauma, it's the same way as if we were gonna go see a therapist or whatever. We would want someone who we could connect with and would understand what's going on. It's the same choice that you're making to like see someone who looks like you, or as a woman in general, in larger terms, but all in a narrower term, a Black woman. Mhm. Yes. Mhm. 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 Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So most of our medicinal plants are also food. Um, for example, nettles, right? Stinging nettles. It's a plant that we use often for energy and for blood building. It's really, really high in iron, and so we use it for people that are anemic, or we use it for mothers that are pregnant. And so nettles could be eaten like spinach. It's like spinach. It's wild, but it grows. It has a ton more chlorophyll than spinach has and a ton more iron than spinach has. But we can eat a lot of our medicine. The problem is sometimes we don't eat enough of it, as opposed to making a really rich overnight infusion of nettles and drinking it as a tea, and that way we get most of the benefits of the plant, as opposed to like having to eat nettles a lot throughout the day. Like, yes, again. So are you a healer? You were asking me. Um, so I plants are categorized by certain metals also, especially within Chinese medicine. Like we will have like plants that are categorized in that way, or Vedic medicine always also has that. And it's not so much done in the Western world. So not really included in Western herbalism. Yes. Hi.
For practical reasons, one, you talk about using plant medicine that is in your current environment, but also from like an ancestral, like if you have anybody that is African, does it make sense to like think about applications of like African plants or no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think, so you're asking if you have ancestors who come from different places, it's also, is it practical to use those medicines, since I've referenced that you should use medicine that grows around you? And I would say my comment to that would be, absolutely, if you're in Africa, please drink, but I think we have so the herbal business is $1 billion business, right? There's lots of money being spent with herbs. And so for every now and then, we get these herbs that all of a sudden are a trend. So people will say to me, moringa, have you heard about it? Do you know it heals everything? And I'll say, oh yeah, I've heard about moringa, and it heals many things, but I'm sure it doesn't heal everything. Or, every year is another trend, and a lot of those trends are coming out of the Caribbean or Africa or across the diaspora, and sometimes it's really a capitalist mentality that's bringing these herbs to the forefront. And my responsibility in this medicine as an herbalist is to say, we don't have to consume things that we don't even know how we got them. Part of the medicine is us accessing, touching, being in touch with that plant, looking at that plant, growing the plant. And so many of these products we receive in these tea bags are like powdered down, and it has no life force or no energy. And I don't see how that would be beneficial to you anyhow. Mm-hmm.
How do we start listening?
To the plants? Observe. So find a plant, preferably something that grows by you, and take some time out of the day to actually sit with that plant. My level 2 apprentices in herbalism, they have to spend the entire level 2 with one plant. Just sitting, observing, understanding, taking the medicine, being a part of it. After that time, it's like you'll remember that plant forever. So just that, like sitting with the plant, spending time with it. It's like if you're getting to know a new friend. There's no other way to get to know that friend other than spending time with that person, right? So the same way. And start with something that's easy for you to access. So maybe it's at the park, or maybe it's in your yard, and just spend time with it. Yeah. Yes, Sean.
So we had a really surprising moment today with your apprentice.
Oh, Mirna. Mm-hmm.
Mirna.
Mm-hmm.
We asked a group of our teams who can identify a space where they can go to for care.
Mm-hmm.
And all the teenagers could identify individuals, but they could not name a space where they could go to for healing or for care, whether that's self-care or social care.
Right.
And so you talk a lot about the responsibility almost of passing on knowledge to our own. How do we create space for these youth where they would consider this knowledge important, not only for themselves, but for community?
Yeah. So that question has I have many different answers to that one question. The first thing I'd like to say is the space primarily should be home. So creating a space in your home that we can introduce our children to what this medicine looks like, right? Number 2, I think that I'm really excited by programs such as your program, which is like introducing youth to this medicine. And also, some of my apprentices that are teachers or social workers have started programs like this in their schools. So they have met with the administration and said, I want to create something where students can learn self-care and start coming and taking care of themselves. They've even gone so far that they've created like gardens outside of their school where they're like learning the plants and planting the plants. But these spaces are created when we see a need for them. So first speaking to folks about what is it that they really need, and then supporting the spaces that are there. Like I said before, the botanicas that I grew up with weren't there anymore. The herb shops weren't there anymore. I think there's a resurgence of that energy now, and I think the only thing that will keep them present in our communities is our support. So the more that we can actually wander into these places and offer our support, the more spaces then we'll have for folks to show up. Yes. I'm sorry? So before you pick plants and take them for medicine, you should identify them as medicine. And so there's several plant identification book for medicinal plants that you can purchase if you're going harvesting, and that should be key. You do a walk with someone who knows plants is another way. I believe there's someone called Wildman Bill in New York that does lots of medicinal plant walks. I do medicinal plant walks, but they're mostly for my apprentices. But there's other folks that are showing you what plants to forage and what not to. And so if you're interested, get involved in one of those plant walks so that you can learn the plants that exist near you, or get one of those, there's a book called Medicinal Plants of the East, which is just plants that grow here on the East Coast that you can also use as identifying. Yes, foraging apps where you could take a picture of the plant now, right? And it tells you, yeah, what it is. Someone showed me that. That's wonderful. Yeah, Sean. Yes. Mhm.
Can you speak a little bit to intuition, what role does intuition play in the practice, and how can one cultivate that on a daily basis and also kind of, I played a little of the mentor a lot, but how to cultivate with mentees that intuition and
Yeah. Oh, intuition plays a tremendous role in my practice. My entire level 2 class will tell you that. Um, any recommendations that we make, I ask them first, what are they hearing intuitively, even before they use their knowledge that they know about. This practice it comes from our roots. It's my ancestral practice. So I'm consistently listening to a voice that's not my own to think of like what's the deeper medicine that this person is coming in with. So when someone comes into the apothecary, I'm still and I'm listening to what's going on with them, and then quietly a plant will appear to me and it will say, oh, how about this plant? And so when I train my apprentices, that's a huge part of it. Like trust that intuitive voice that you hear and then move forward with that voice, because it's oftentimes the perfect medicine for the person that's standing in front of you. I think we live, and because of this disconnect in our bodies, I think that's why we don't trust our intuition so much and we rely on other people to tell us what's going on with us. But creating places of silence. So when you're not feeling well, if you took a moment to just be still and say, what's really going on with my body in this moment, you will hear. Most of the times we know what's wrong with us. We're just not really sure enough to admit it. That we're like we know what's going on. And it's being able to trust that voice over time that builds our intuition when it comes to this medicine. And sometimes, believe it or not, I've had people walk into an apothecary and an herb will fall off the shelf in front of them. And generally I'm like, oh, let's just start there. Let's not go further. And there are other tools, right? So people use like dowsing or muscle tests or like pendulums, all of these to like what my intuition is seeking is probably what I need in that moment. Yeah. How are we doing, Sean? Oh, you have your hand up? Okay. Okay. I was like, do you? No. One more question. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, and it's sort of related to what she was talking about, but you were talking about being in your body and like filling your body, training your body, and we could talk about like where to start with that, really disconnecting with your body, like just generally, but even if there's plants that are grounding.
Yeah, grounding is big. I think, I was thinking about that the other day, and so many people come into the apothecary and they're like, I need to ground. I need to get back into my body. I'm flying out of my body. And I think when we we're so there's so much coming at us all day that it's really hard to just ground into ourselves. So plants that I use to help are anything that have roots. So I use a lot of my root plants to pull someone back down if they're flying out. If it's if they're a lot in their mind. So plants like, for example, burdock is a great grounding plant. Here's some roots for you. If you can't shut off your mind, one plant I like to work with is skullcap. It just eases your mind so that you can actually be in a meditative state, so that you can be a bit still. So the process of getting in your body always begins with stillness, really. Just being still for a moment. One more. Yes.
So how is plant healing similar or different from healing that might occur with essential oils or the oils?
Not very. So essential oils are the strongest parts of plants, meaning that in order for us to have essential oils, there's a ton of plant medicine that we have to access. And so some herbalists really feel they're against essential oils. They're like, this is too much plant medicine to use for that little oil. And essential oils should not be taken internally. So some people use food-grade essential oils and use it by the drops, but plant medicine has a wider scope. of being used, and we use less material. So it also helps to have a sustainable practice in the long run. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. It's been great.